A vacuum cleaner sucks things up, everybody knows that. You turn it on, you push it across the carpet, and it sucks the dirt right off the floor. The crumbs, the dust, the little bits of whatever your kids dropped, sucked up, gone. Simple. That's completely wrong, and I can prove it. See, here's the trouble. The word suction has fooled you. It's fooled nearly everybody. You say it with such confidence. The vacuum sucks it up, and the moment you say it, you think you've explained something. But you haven't explained a damn thing. You've just named the mystery and walked away. That's not physics. That's vocabulary. So let me ask you to do something uncomfortable. I want you to forget the word suction for the next 20-some minutes. Just erase it. Pretend it doesn't exist. And when we're done, I'll give it back to you, but it will mean something completely different than what you think it means right now. All right, let's start with a vacuum cleaner, since that's what brought us here. You plug it in. You flip the switch. A motor spins. A fan turns. And dirt flies up into the bag. That's what you see. That's the experience. And from the experience, you've built a story in your head. The story goes like this. The machine reaches out with some invisible hand, grabs the dirt, and yanks it inside. A pulling force. A sucking force. Something inside is pulling. Now I want you to hold that picture. Really believe it for a moment, because a lot of very smart people believed something like it for a very long time. The idea that nature has a pulling force related to emptiness goes back more than 2,000 years. Aristotle himself said it. He said nature abhors a vacuum. Those are practically his words. Nature will not allow empty space to exist. If you try to create emptiness, nature rushes in to fill it. There's a horror to it. Horror vacuum, the old scholars called it. A fear of the void. And honestly, it made sense. Think about it from their perspective. You push a piston up inside a sealed cylinder. Water follows. You seal the end of a tube, put it in a river, and plug the other end with your thumb. Lift the tube out. The water stays inside. It seems obvious that something is pulling. Some force that nature herself exerts to prevent emptiness from existing. It's elegant. It's intuitive. It explains what you see. For nearly 2,000 years, from Aristotle through the great medieval scholars and into the Renaissance, horror vacuum was the accepted explanation. Nobody seriously questioned it. The philosophers repeated it. The engineers relied on it. It was as fundamental to their understanding of the world as gravity is to ours, maybe more so. So don't feel bad if you believe something similar about your vacuum cleaner. You're in the company of Aristotle. That's not a bad club to be in. He just happened to be wrong about this one. Now here's where the cracks start to show. If nature truly abhors a vacuum, if this filling force has no limit, then it should work no matter what, right? If you build a pump and try to suck water upward out of a well, nature should push that water up as high as you want. 10 feet, 20 feet, 100 feet. There should be no ceiling, because the horror of emptiness is absolute. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't taper off. If nature abhors a vacuum, she should abhor it with equal ferocity, whether you're asking her to lift water 1 foot or 1,000 feet. But there is a ceiling. And the well diggers of Florence knew it. In the early 1600s, the Grand Duke of Tuscany commissioned ornamental fountains and water systems for the city. The engineers built suction pumps, the standard technology of the day. And these pumps work brilliantly for shallow wells. You work the handle, you create a partial vacuum above the water, and the water rises obediently through the pipe. 12 feet, 18 feet, 25 feet. Beautiful. But when they tried to lift water from deeper wells, something maddening happened. At about 33 feet, the water just stopped. It refused to go higher. You could pump harder. You could build a bigger pump. You could hire the finest craftsmen in Italy to machine the most perfectly sealed cylinder in history. Didn't matter. 33 feet was the wall. Now this was deeply embarrassing, not just for the engineers, but for the entire philosophical tradition. If nature abhors a vacuum, why does she stop abhorring it at 33 feet? Does she get tired? Does she have a limit to her horror? That's a strange kind of fundamental force, one that quits after 33 feet. Nobody had a good answer for that if you believed in horror vacuum. The engineers were frustrated. And like frustrated engineers tend to do, they went to the smartest man they could find. They went to Galileo. Galileo was old by this time. It was near the end of his life. And bless him, he was honest. He admitted he didn't have a clean explanation. He suggested, somewhat awkwardly, that perhaps the column of water breaks under its own weight, the way a rope breaks if you make it too long. Gravity pulls on the water column, and at 33 feet, the water column is too heavy for whatever force is holding it up to sustain, which is an interesting thought, and it's getting warmer. But it's not quite the right picture. What Galileo did that mattered most was talk about it. He discussed the problem openly. He wrote about it. And one of the people paying very close attention was his student and secretary, a young man named Evangelista Torricelli. After Galileo died in 1642, Torricelli took up the problem. And he had a brilliant idea. If the limit of water lifting is about 33 feet, then whatever is responsible for holding the water up must exert a fixed amount of force. And if that's true, then a denser liquid should be supported to a proportionally shorter height. Mercury is about 13.5 times denser than water. So if the responsible force can hold up 33 feet of water, it should hold up roughly 30 inches of mercury. So Torricelli ran the experiment. He took a glass tube about 4 feet long, sealed at one end. He filled it completely with mercury. He covered the open end with his thumb, careful not to let any air in. He flipped the tube upside down and plunged the open end into a dish of mercury. Then he removed his thumb. The mercury dropped partway down the tube and stopped. It settled at almost exactly 30 inches above the level of mercury in the dish. And above it, in the sealed top of the tube, there was a space with nothing in it. No air, no liquid, nothing. A vacuum, sitting right there inside the tube. And nature didn't rush in to fill it. Nature didn't seem horrified at all. The void just sat there, perfectly calm, while the mercury held steady at 30 inches. So much for horror vacuum. But Torricelli saw something far more profound than the death of an old idea. He understood what was actually happening. He wrote something extraordinary. I'm paraphrasing, but the idea was this. We live at the bottom of an ocean of air, and this ocean has weight. The weight of the air pressing down on the mercury in the dish is what holds the mercury up in the tube. It's not a pulling force from above, it's a pushing force from below. The atmosphere pushes on the mercury surface in the dish, and that push supports a column of mercury 30 inches high. Do you hear the difference? This is the entire revolution right here in a sentence. Nothing is pulling, something is pushing. And that something is air. Torricelli had, in that single experiment, killed a 2,000-year-old idea and replaced it with the correct one. He'd also, almost by accident, invented the barometer. That 30-inch column of mercury moves up and down as atmospheric pressure changes with the weather. But that's a story for another day. What matters for us is what happened next. Because the obvious test of Torricelli's claim is this. If the mercury is being held up by the weight of the atmosphere, then the height of the mercury should change if you change how much atmosphere is above it. Go higher up a mountain, less air above you, less weight pressing down, lower pressure, shorter mercury column. Come back down, more air above you, more weight, the column rises again. And that's exactly what Blaise Pascal set out to test. Pascal was a French mathematician, brilliant, sickly, and absolutely relentless when he smelled a good problem. He arranged for his brother-in-law, a man named Florin Perrier, to carry a mercury barometer up the Puy de Dôme, a mountain in central France that rises about 3,000 feet above the surrounding plain. On September 19, 1648, Perrier began the climb. He left one barometer at the base of the mountain, watched by a colleague, and carried a second one to the summit. At the base, the mercury stood at its normal reading for that elevation. At the summit, 3,000 feet up, the mercury had dropped by more than 3 inches. 3 inches! That's enormous, and it meant exactly what Torricelli had predicted. Less atmosphere above you means less weight pressing down on the mercury, which means a shorter column. The mercury isn't being pulled up by a horror of emptiness. If it were, the height wouldn't change with altitude at all. A cosmic horror of the void wouldn't care whether you're on a mountain or in a valley. It would abhor the vacuum equally everywhere. But atmospheric weight cares very much. It gets lighter as you climb, because there's less air above you to do the pressing. Perrier climbed back down. The mercury rose to its original height. He repeated the trip several times. Every single ascent confirmed the result. Torricelli was right. We live at the bottom of an ocean of air, and that ocean has weight, and that weight is what does all the pushing. After this, the old idea was dead. Truly dead. Not wounded, not weakened. Finished. Horror vacuum had survived for 2,000 years, and it was killed by a man walking up a mountain with a tube of mercury. That's the power of a good experiment. One clean test can overthrow 20 centuries of philosophy. And notice the pattern here. Aristotle reasoned from his armchair and got the wrong answer for 2,000 years. Torricelli got the right answer by filling a tube with mercury and looking at what happened. Pascal confirmed it by walking up a mountain. The lesson is not that Aristotle was stupid. He was brilliant. The lesson is that nature doesn't care how smart you are. She doesn't care how elegant your theory is. She only answers to experiments. You can reason about the world all day long, and if you never test your reasoning against what actually happens, you can stay wrong for 2 millennia. Let's stay with this pressure idea now, because it changes everything about how you think about your vacuum cleaner. You're sitting right now at the bottom of an atmosphere that stretches roughly 60 miles above your head. All that air has mass, every cubic foot of it. And because it has mass and it's sitting in Earth's gravitational field, it has weight. All the layers above you are pressing down on you, layer after layer after layer. The air right at the surface where you live is the most compressed because it carries the weight of all the air above it. This weight translates to a pressure of about 14.7 pounds on every square inch of surface at sea level. 14.7 pounds per square inch, pressing on everything from every direction. Let me make sure you feel how big that is. Hold out your hand, palm up. The area of your palm is maybe 15 square inches, give or take. That means the atmosphere is pressing down on your palm with a force of about 220 pounds, just on your palm. Now consider your entire body. The total surface area of a human body is roughly 2,700 square inches. Multiply that by 14.7 pounds per square inch, and you get around 40,000 pounds of force. 20 tons. 20 tons of air pressing on you right now. Why aren't you crushed? Because the same pressure pushes from inside. The air inside your lungs, inside your sinuses, dissolved in your blood, it pushes outward with the same 14.7 pounds per square inch. The forces balance. You're in equilibrium. You don't feel it for the same reason a fish doesn't feel the ocean. The pressure is everywhere, always, and perfectly balanced, so it's invisible. But the instant you break that balance, even slightly, dramatic things happen. Let me take you now inside the vacuum cleaner, because I want you to watch the physics happen step by step. Inside the body of a vacuum cleaner, there's an electric motor connected to a fan. When you flip the switch, the motor spins the fan at high speed. The fan blades are angled so that as they spin, they push air from the front side of the fan toward the back and out through an exhaust port in the machine. That air gets expelled into the room. Here's the key moment. The fan has just pushed some air out. That means there are now fewer air molecules in the space behind the nozzle than there were a moment ago. Fewer molecules means fewer collisions with the walls of that space. Fewer collisions means lower pressure. The pressure inside the machine drops below atmospheric pressure. Maybe it drops to 12 pounds per square inch instead of 14.7, maybe less, depending on the power of the motor. Now look at what's happening at the nozzle, the opening pressed against your carpet. On one side of that opening, the inside of the machine, you've got 12 pounds per square inch. On the other side, the open room, you've got the full atmosphere, 14.7 pounds per square inch. There's a difference of about 2.7 pounds per square inch across that opening. The air does what air always does. It moves from higher pressure to lower pressure. It rushes through the nozzle into the machine. And as it rushes through, it flows over the surface of the carpet, picks up dust and crumbs and pet hair, and carries them along. The debris isn't being grabbed. It isn't being pulled by an invisible hand. It's being swept along by a river of air that's being pushed through the nozzle by the atmosphere. The motor creates the imbalance. The atmosphere provides the force. The dirt goes along for the ride. That's the entire mechanism. And notice something important. The vacuum cleaner has a maximum limit. Since it works by making the pressure inside lower than the pressure outside, and the outside pressure is fixed at 14.7 pounds per square inch, you can never create a pressure difference greater than 14.7 pounds per square inch. Even if you built a perfect machine that removed every single molecule from the inside, achieved absolute zero pressure, the maximum push the atmosphere can provide is 14.7 pounds per square inch. That's it. That's the ceiling. This is exactly why those Florentine pumps couldn't lift water past 33 feet. A column of water 33 feet tall exerts a pressure at its base of 14.7 pounds per square inch, which is exactly what the atmosphere can support. Ask for 34 feet, and the atmosphere doesn't have enough push. It's not a flaw in the pump. It's a fundamental limit of the atmosphere itself. Think about that for a second. Every suction device ever built, every vacuum cleaner, every drinking straw, every suction cup, every syringe is limited by this same ceiling. The atmosphere can only push so hard because the atmosphere only weighs so much. Contrast this with pushing from the other direction. A positive pressure pump, one that pushes fluid from below, has no such limit. You want to push water 1,000 feet up? Build a strong enough pump. 10,000 feet? Build a stronger one. There's no ceiling on pushing. But there's a hard ceiling on what the atmosphere's push can accomplish, because the atmosphere has a fixed weight. That's a deep asymmetry in nature, and it matters enormously in engineering. Every plumber knows it. Every hydraulic engineer knows it. You can't suck water up a skyscraper. You have to push it. And here's a thought that should stop you cold. Take your vacuum cleaner to the moon. Set it down on the lunar surface next to a pile of moon dust. Plug it in. Let's imagine you've got power. Flip the switch. The motor spins. The fan turns. Everything inside the machine works exactly as designed, and nothing happens. Absolutely nothing. The dust doesn't move. Not a single grain. The vacuum cleaner sits there, motor whirring, completely impotent. Why? Because there is no atmosphere on the moon, no air, no molecules flying around at 1,000 miles per hour, no 14.7 pounds per square inch pressing on anything. The motor can spin until it burns out. It can create the most perfect vacuum inside the machine that's ever existed. It doesn't matter. Without atmospheric pressure on the outside, there's no pressure difference, no net push, no airflow, no force to move the dust. That should tell you as clearly as anything can where the vacuum cleaner's power actually comes from. It doesn't come from the motor, it doesn't come from the fan, it doesn't come from the machine at all. It comes from the atmosphere. The machine is the setup, the atmosphere is the muscle. Take away the atmosphere, and the machine is just a noisy box. Now flip it around. Imagine you took your vacuum cleaner to Venus. Venus has an atmosphere that is nearly 100 times denser than Earth's. The surface pressure on Venus is about 90 times what we experience at sea level here. Your vacuum cleaner on Venus, assuming it could survive the temperature, would be spectacularly powerful. The pressure difference between the inside of the machine and the Venusian atmosphere would be enormous. Dust, rocks, small boulders might go flying into the nozzle. Same machine, same motor, same fan. But a much heavier atmosphere doing the pushing. The machine doesn't change. The atmosphere changes. And that tells you which one is really doing the work. Let me drive this home with something you've done 1,000 times. Drinking through a straw. You put a straw in a glass of lemonade. You close your lips around the top. You suck. The lemonade rises up the straw and into your mouth, and you think, naturally, that you pulled it up. Your mouth created some pulling force that lifted the liquid. Here's what actually happened. When you sealed your lips around the straw and expanded your chest cavity, you lowered the pressure inside your mouth. Your diaphragm contracted and moved downward. Your rib cage expanded slightly, and the volume of your mouth and airway increased. Same amount of air, bigger space, lower pressure. Maybe you dropped the pressure inside your mouth by 1 or 2 pounds per square inch below atmospheric. That's all it takes. Meanwhile, the surface of the lemonade in the glass is exposed to the full atmosphere. 14.7 pounds per square inch, pressing down on the liquid from above. So now there's a pressure difference across the length of the straw. Higher pressure at the bottom, lower pressure at the top. The lemonade gets pushed up by the atmosphere. The atmosphere acts like a piston, pressing down on the surface of the liquid and driving it up the straw toward the lower pressure zone in your mouth. You didn't pull anything, you just made some room. The atmosphere did the pushing. Think about that next time you're at a restaurant, casually sipping a soda through a straw. You're not doing the lifting. You're creating a tiny zone of low pressure in your mouth, and the 20-ton atmosphere sitting on top of that glass of soda does the rest. It's like you opened a trapdoor and an elephant walked through. You didn't move the elephant, you just opened the door. And if you doubt it, consider this thought experiment. Take that same straw and that same glass of lemonade and transport them to the edge of space. 60 miles up. Essentially no atmosphere. Now try to drink. Expand your lungs, create all the low pressure you want. Nothing happens. The lemonade sits there, motionless. No atmospheric pressure to push it up. Without the atmosphere, the straw is useless. It's just a hollow tube. Or try the opposite thought experiment. Take the straw to Jupiter, where the atmosphere is enormously thick and heavy. The atmospheric pressure down deep in Jupiter's atmosphere is unimaginably higher than Earth's. A straw there could push liquid up much higher than 33 feet, because the atmosphere pushing down on the liquid surface would be far more powerful. Different planet, different atmospheric weight, different limit. The straw itself does nothing. It's the atmosphere pressing on the liquid surface that does the work. Change the atmosphere, you change what the straw can accomplish. Now let me tell you about a man who proved all of this in the most spectacular way imaginable. His name was Otto von Guericke, and he was the mayor of Magdeburg, a city in Germany. This was the 1650s, just a few years after Torricelli's experiments. Von Guericke was obsessed with the concept of vacuum and air pressure. He built one of the first truly effective air pumps, and he understood, perhaps better than anyone of his era, the immense force that atmospheric pressure could exert. But understanding is one thing. He needed to make people see it. People who weren't scientists, nobles, politicians, the general public, people who had spent their whole lives not thinking about air. So he devised a demonstration. He had 2 large copper hemispheres cast, each about 20 inches in diameter. They were machined to fit together snugly, rim to rim, forming a hollow sphere. He greased the rims to create a good seal. Then, in front of a crowd that included the Holy Roman Emperor himself, he placed the hemispheres together, attached his air pump, and evacuated the air from inside. Now think about what's happening physically. On the outside of the sphere, you've got the full atmosphere pressing inward from every direction, 14.7 pounds per square inch on the entire outer surface. On the inside, almost nothing. The air's been pumped out. So the atmospheric pressure is pressing those two hemispheres together with enormous force, and there's essentially nothing pushing back from inside. How much force? The circular area where the two hemispheres meet is roughly 314 square inches for a 20-inch diameter sphere. Multiply by 14.7 pounds per square inch, and you get about 4,600 pounds of force holding them together. More than 2 tons. Just from air pressure. Then came the showdown. Von Guericke hitched a team of 8 horses to one hemisphere and another team of 8 horses to the other. 16 horses in total, straining in opposite directions. The crowd watched. The horses pulled. The ropes went taut. The animals dug their hooves into the ground, snorting and heaving, and the hemispheres did not budge. 16 horses, the most powerful engines of that era, could not pull apart 2 copper bowls that a child could separate just by opening a valve. 16 horses could not pull them apart. The crowd was astonished. But von Guericke was just getting started. He calmed the horses, walked to the sphere, and opened a small valve. Air hissed back inside, the pressure equalized, and the 2 hemispheres fell apart in his hands, light as anything. No horses needed, just let the air back in. It was theater, it was physics, it was genius, and the message was unmistakable. The air you walk around in, the air you ignore, the air that feels like nothing, can hold together 2 pieces of copper that 16 of the strongest animals in Europe couldn't separate. That's how powerful atmospheric pressure is. And it's pressing on you right now with that same force. Let me go deeper now, because I want you to see this at the molecular level. Understanding it at this scale is where the real clarity comes from. Air is made of molecules, about 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and a sprinkling of other things. At room temperature, these molecules are not sitting still. They're flying. They move at roughly 1,000 miles per hour in random directions, just zooming. And they're tiny. There are incomprehensibly many of them. In a single cubic inch of air at sea level, there are roughly 400 billion molecules. That's 4 times 10 to the 20th power, give or take. Each molecule is moving independently, bouncing off other molecules, bouncing off walls, bouncing off your skin. Every time a molecule hits a surface, it delivers a tiny push. 1 molecule? You'd never feel it. The push is absurdly small. But 400 billion molecules hitting every square inch of surface, many times per second? Those tiny pushes add up. They add up to 14.7 pounds per square inch. That's what pressure is. Not a mysterious squeezing force, not some magical property of the air. Just an enormous number of tiny particles hitting surfaces and pushing. The reason the pressure is the same in all directions is that the molecules move randomly. They don't have a preferred direction. Upward, downward, sideways, diagonal, it's all equally likely. So any surface you hold up, no matter which way it faces, gets the same bombardment from the same number of molecules. Equal pressure in all directions. Now, when the vacuum cleaner motor spins the fan and blows air out the exhaust, it physically moves some of those molecules out of the space behind the nozzle. The density of molecules in that space decreases. Fewer molecules per cubic inch. That means fewer collisions per second on the walls of that space. Fewer collisions means less total push. The pressure drops. But outside the nozzle, in the open room, nothing has changed. The full density of atmospheric molecules is still there, still flying at 1,000 miles per hour, still hitting the mouth of the nozzle at the full rate. So you've got more molecular punches per second on the outside of the nozzle than on the inside. The net effect is a push from outside to inside. The air flows in, and the dust flows with it. You could think of it like a crowd of people. Imagine a packed stadium with equal density of people everywhere, all milling about randomly. Nobody moves on average, because the jostling pushes equally in all directions. Now imagine you suddenly open a gate on one side and let half the people out of one section. The crowd from the rest of the stadium would naturally flow into that section. Not because anyone's pulling them, not because the empty seats are exerting a force, but because there's more jostling pushing them from the packed side than pushing back from the emptier side. The imbalance in random collisions drives the flow. That's exactly what happens with air molecules in a vacuum cleaner. So the mechanism from top to bottom is this. The motor removes molecules from a zone. The molecular bombardment on the outside of that zone exceeds the bombardment on the inside. The net force pushes air inward. Debris rides the current. Nothing sucks. Everything pushes. Let me take you somewhere unexpected now. Your lungs. How do you breathe? If you ask most people, they say something like, I breathe in, which sounds active, like your lungs are reaching out and grabbing air. But that's exactly the same mistake as the vacuum cleaner. Your lungs don't reach out and grab anything. Here's the real sequence. Your diaphragm, a big dome-shaped muscle at the bottom of your rib cage, contracts. When it contracts, it flattens, moving downward. At the same time, the intercostal muscles between your ribs contract and pull your rib cage upward and outward. Both actions increase the volume of your chest cavity. More volume means the same number of air molecules are now spread over a bigger space. Fewer collisions per square inch on the inner walls of your lungs. The pressure inside your lungs drops slightly below atmospheric, maybe by 1 or 2 pounds per square inch. That's all. And the atmosphere, pressing on your nose and mouth from the outside at the full 14.7 pounds per square inch, pushes air in. Air flows down your trachea into your bronchial tubes and into the tiny sacs of your lungs. Not because you pulled it. Because the atmosphere pushed it. You created the pressure drop. The atmosphere supplied the force. Exhaling is the reverse. Your diaphragm relaxes, moves upward. Your rib cage settles inward. The chest volume decreases. The air molecules inside are now squeezed into a smaller space. More collisions per square inch. Higher pressure. The pressure inside your lungs rises above atmospheric. And the air gets pushed out through your nose and mouth. Every single breath you take works on the same principle as a vacuum cleaner. You're a biological pump that creates alternating pressure differences. Low pressure to breathe in, high pressure to breathe out. And the atmosphere does the actual pushing both ways. In a hospital, when someone can't breathe on their own, they're put on a mechanical ventilator. And what does the ventilator do? It creates positive pressure. It pushes air into the lungs. The doctors and engineers who designed these machines understand the physics perfectly. They don't try to suck air into the patient. They push it in, because the pushing is the real mechanism. They're doing mechanically what the atmosphere normally does on its own. Here's another place this shows up that might surprise you. Space. An astronaut on a spacewalk is working in a near-perfect vacuum. The pressure inside their suit is maintained at roughly 4 to 5 pounds per square inch, lower than sea level pressure but enough to keep them alive and functioning. Outside the suit, the pressure is essentially zero, a void. What happens if the suit gets punctured? The air inside rushes out, fast, violently. And people say the vacuum of space sucked the air out. You hear it in movies and news reports everywhere. But that's backwards. Space doesn't do anything. Space is passive. It's empty. It has no force, no pull, no mechanism of action whatsoever. Emptiness cannot reach in and grab things. What happens is that the air inside the suit, at 4 or 5 pounds per square inch, is exerting outward pressure on every square inch of the suit's inner surface. Every molecule in that air is flying around at high speed, hitting the walls, pushing outward. As long as the suit is intact, the wall pushes back. Equilibrium. But the instant a hole appears, the molecules that happen to be flying toward that hole encounter no wall. They fly right through. And on the other side, there's nothing to push them back. No atmospheric molecules, no resistance, no opposition. So they escape. The air pushes itself out. It expels itself under its own pressure. The vacuum doesn't pull. This is the same physics as the vacuum cleaner and the straw in your lungs, just in a more dramatic setting. Wherever there's a pressure imbalance, the higher pressure side pushes toward the lower pressure side, always pushing, never pulling. And once you internalize this, you start seeing it in places you never expected. Take an airplane. You're flying at 35,000 feet. Up there, the atmosphere is thin. The pressure outside the aircraft is only about 3 to 4 pounds per square inch, roughly a quarter of what it is at sea level. Inside the cabin, the airline maintains a pressure equivalent to about 6,000 to 8,000 feet of altitude, roughly 11 pounds per square inch. Not the full sea level pressure, but enough to keep you comfortable. That means there's a pressure difference of about 7 or 8 pounds per square inch between inside and outside, on every single square inch of that fuselage. Now, an airplane fuselage is a big cylinder. The total internal surface area is enormous. Add up all those square inches, and the air inside the cabin is pushing outward on the fuselage walls with a force of tens of thousands of pounds. The airplane is basically a pressurized balloon flying through thin air. The structure has to be strong enough to contain that outward push. If the fuselage is compromised, if a crack opens up, the air inside doesn't get sucked out by the sky. The air inside pushes itself out, exactly like the spacesuit scenario. The higher pressure air blasts through the opening because it's being pushed by its own molecular bombardment, and nothing on the other side is pushing back. Every rivet, every seam, every window seal on that airplane is fighting against this outward push. The engineers who designed the fuselage aren't worried about space sucking. They're worried about the cabin air pushing. Or think about deep sea diving. A diver descending to 100 feet below the surface of the ocean is experiencing roughly 4 times atmospheric pressure. The water above is pressing down on them with tremendous force. Their lungs, their sinuses, every air-filled space in their body is being squeezed. And the air they breathe from their tanks has to be delivered at that same high pressure so they can actually inflate their lungs against the surrounding water pressure. If the air in the tank were at sea level pressure, the diver's lungs couldn't expand at all. The water pressure would keep them compressed. The regulator on the tank adjusts the air pressure to match the surrounding water so the diver can breathe normally. It's all pressure balancing, push against push. Or consider something as mundane as a blood pressure cuff. The doctor wraps it around your arm and inflates it. What's the cuff doing? It's applying external pressure to the blood vessel. When the cuff pressure exceeds the pressure of the blood being pumped through the artery, the vessel collapses and blood flow stops. The doctor slowly releases the cuff pressure, and at the moment the blood pressure inside the artery is just strong enough to push the vessel open again, you hear a pulse through the stethoscope. The whole measurement is a contest between 2 pressures, the cuff pushing in and the blood pushing out. Whoever pushes harder wins. That's all a blood pressure reading is. A measurement of which push is stronger. Pressure differences running your vacuum cleaner. Pressure differences filling your lungs. Pressure differences holding an airplane together. Pressure differences letting a diver breathe. Pressure differences measuring your blood. It's the same physics everywhere, playing the same game over and over at every scale of life. This principle explains wind too. All wind. Why does the breeze blow on a summer afternoon? Because the sun heats the ground unevenly. One patch of earth gets warmer than another. The air above the warm patch heats up, expands, becomes less dense, and rises. That creates a zone of lower pressure near the surface. Nearby, over a cooler patch, the air is denser and the pressure is higher. The high-pressure air pushes toward the low-pressure zone. That push is what you feel as wind on your face. Storms, hurricanes, trade winds, sea breezes, all of it is the same physics. Pressure differences caused by uneven heating, and the atmosphere pushing from high to low to try to equalize. A hurricane is, in a sense, the atmosphere doing exactly what it does inside your vacuum cleaner, just on a scale of hundreds of miles instead of a few inches. The pressure in the center of a hurricane is lower than the pressure around it, and the surrounding air rushes inward with terrifying force. Not because the storm center sucks, because the higher pressure air surrounding it pushes. The whole global weather system is a vast, complicated, beautiful version of what happens every time you turn on a vacuum cleaner. Let me pause here and collect the thread, because I want you to see the pattern that runs through all of this. Vacuum cleaner, the motor removes air, the atmosphere pushes through the nozzle. Straw, your lungs lower the pressure, the atmosphere pushes the liquid up. Breathing, your diaphragm lowers the pressure, the atmosphere pushes air in. Torricelli's tube, the vacuum above the mercury has no pressure, the atmosphere pushes the mercury up. Von Guericke's hemispheres, the air is removed from inside, the atmosphere pushes the halves together. Suit breach in space, the air inside has pressure, the void outside has none, and the air pushes itself out. Wind, uneven pressure across a landscape, and air pushes from high to low. Every single one of these is the same phenomenon. Pressure difference, air pushing from the high side to the low side. Nothing pulling, ever. Once you see this pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee it. Suction cups stick to walls because you press the cup flat, squeeze the air out from underneath, and the atmosphere presses the cup against the wall from outside. Syringes draw up fluid because pulling the plunger back creates lower pressure inside the barrel, and the atmosphere pushes fluid in from outside. Even certain animals use this principle. The suckers on an octopus's arms create low-pressure zones against surfaces, and the surrounding water pressure, which works just like atmospheric pressure, does the actual gripping. Same physics. Different situations. Same verb. Push. You see it in industry too. Factories use enormous vacuum systems to move grain through pipes, to lift sheets of glass without touching them, to hold workpieces on machining tables. Every one of these applications works because the atmosphere pushes. The industrial engineer doesn't think in terms of suction. The engineer thinks in terms of pressure differentials, measured in inches of mercury or pascals, because those are the real quantities that determine whether the system works. Now I want to circle back to the word I asked you to forget at the beginning. Suction. I'm going to give it back to you now, but with a new definition. Suction is not a force. It's not something that acts on objects. It's not a thing that reaches out and grabs. Suction is a word we use to describe a situation where a pressure difference causes a net push from the higher pressure side toward the lower pressure side. It's shorthand, a convenience, a way of speaking, and it's perfectly fine to use the word, as long as you know that when you say suction, what you really mean is the atmosphere is pushing because something removed the opposing pressure. The fundamental forces of nature, as we understand them, are gravity, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. 4 forces. Suction is not on that list. It has never been on that list. It never will be. Suction is a consequence of pressure imbalance, which is itself a consequence of molecular collisions, which are governed by electromagnetism at the atomic level. It's not its own thing. It's a pattern that emerges when enormous numbers of particles bounce around, and you remove some of them from one side. And that brings me to something I think is really worth sitting with. One of the deepest lessons in all of physics. A lot of the forces we experience in everyday life aren't fundamental forces at all. They're patterns. They're names we've given to the consequences of deeper things, and then we forgot they were just names and started treating them as explanations. Friction isn't a fundamental force. It's a consequence of electromagnetic interactions between surfaces at the atomic level. Billions of tiny bonds forming and breaking as surfaces slide past each other. We call the net result friction and move on. But friction isn't a thing. It's a word for what happens when atoms interact in a particular arrangement. Tension in a rope isn't a fundamental force. It's the electromagnetic bonds between atoms being stretched. Each atom in the rope is connected to its neighbors by forces that resist being pulled apart. The collective resistance of all those bonds is what you feel as tension. But tension itself isn't fundamental. It's a name for a pattern. The push of a spring, Same story. Electromagnetic forces between atoms that resist being compressed or stretched beyond their equilibrium positions. We say spring force as though the spring has some special power. It doesn't. It's just atoms not wanting to be pushed too close together. And suction? It's not even close to fundamental. It's what happens when you have trillions of particles bouncing around randomly and you make the count uneven on one side. Here's a good one. Centrifugal force. You're in a car going around a sharp curve, and you feel yourself being thrown toward the outside of the turn. Centrifugal force, you say. The force that pushes you outward. Except there is no outward force. What's actually happening is that your body wants to keep going in a straight line, because that's what objects do according to Newton's first law. The car turns. You don't. The car door pushes against you, and from your perspective inside the car, it feels like something is pushing you out. But nothing is. You're just going straight while the car curves underneath you. Centrifugal force is not a force. It's a name for what inertia feels like when your frame of reference is rotating. It's the same kind of trick as suction, a name dressed up to look like an explanation. In physics, there's a habit of mind that I think is maybe the most valuable intellectual habit a person can develop. And it's this. When someone gives you an explanation, when they answer your why question, ask yourself, did they actually explain the mechanism? Or did they just hand me a name? Why does the vacuum cleaner pick up dirt? Suction. That's a name. It tells you nothing about what pushes what, or why, or how much force is involved, or what limits it, or what would change if you took the vacuum cleaner to the moon. It's a label slapped on the outside of a box. And the box is still sealed. But if you refuse to accept the name, if you say, no, tell me the mechanism, tell me what is actually pushing what, then you pull on a thread that leads somewhere wonderful. You get atmospheric pressure. You get molecular collisions. You get Torricelli and von Guericke and the weight of 60 miles of air. You get the speed of nitrogen molecules and the 33-foot limit and the reason you can breathe and why wind blows and what happens if you puncture a spacesuit, all from one refusal. All from saying, that's a name, not an explanation. Give me the physics. The vacuum cleaner is just a fan in a box. The atmosphere is an ocean of invisible molecules flying at 1,000 miles per hour, pounding on every surface with a force of 14.7 pounds per square inch, pressing 20 tons on your body alone. And the only reason you don't get flattened is that the same 14.7 pounds per square inch pushes back from inside you, molecule for molecule, collision for collision, in a perfect invisible standoff. Next time you clean the house, remember this. You're not sucking dirt off the floor. You're opening a tiny gate, and the full weight of 60 miles of atmosphere comes barreling through that gate, sweeping the crumbs and dust along like a river carrying leaves. The vacuum cleaner does not suck. The straw does not suck. Your lungs do not suck. Space does not suck. The atmosphere pushes. It always pushes. That's the only verb the air knows. Now I want to hear from you. If suction isn't a real force, what other everyday force do you think is secretly just a name disguising the real physics? Think about it. I bet you can find at least one.